Hello everyone, I'm Keith Tompkins, working with the Computer Engineering ProjectFUN pre-college program. And this year we have three different presentations for you representing three different aspects of the computer engineering program. Computer engineering is where electronics engineering meets programming and logic. So when you tell a computer what you want it to do using programming, it is a computer engineer that has figured out physically how the computer is going to complete your instructions. It's a major black box issue that a lot of people don't understand, and the field really specializes in removing black box after black box from the system until we get down to the very electronics and silicon core of the machine.
Okay, well, my name is Albert, and I'm Jay. And our game is called Charge, and as part of the computer engineering program, the way we design our game is a little bit different, meaning that we do not use a game engine. Instead, we used a platform called GameDuino, and unfortunately, since VGA capabilities aren't available right now, you'll have to bear with seeing it on that tiny screen.
All right, so when we started the course, Keith actually gave us a few materials to use, a few pieces of hardware in a box that we were given, and a few days into the course, we soldered them together to create a controller with the GameDuino, and we decided we wanted to make a game using this controller. So what we made is a 2D side-scroller game. You can see it right here, and if you can see it right here, as two wizards with swords using magic, and there's only 3 controls, which is right and left and slash, and we'll get more into the game when we actually show you. So I'm going to talk about the limitations really quickly. So, I mean, that's a game I'm sure you all recognize. It's Mario, and this is just to give you an example of the GameDuino, which is very similar to the NES's capabilities. So this is really what a GameDuino, for example, could do at its peak. And we had some limitations, such as the hardware. Since it only had a joystick and 4 buttons, it was a little bit difficult to make a 2-player game, but we ended up working around that, and we'll show you how later once again. And as far as software goes, the GameDuino doesn't have as much processing power as a game engine or a console, quite clearly, and so we also had to work around that. We also don't have much experience in C++. We saw close to none before we came into this program, so it was really a learning experience as we were creating the code. And right before we get into the game, I just want to show you how we laid this out. The first week, we wanted to finish all the game art and sprites and implement them by Monday, and then have implement all the game mechanics and do finishing touches the second week. And so that didn't really end up happening. We ended up doing finishing most of the sprites on Monday, and then cutting it pretty close, but ended up pretty well, or pretty good. We'll show you.
Okay, so this is our game. Basically, there's 2 characters, and they're both wizards, and one is red, one is blue. The red guy is controlled by the joystick, and the blue guy is controlled by the buttons. So 2 people play on 1 controller. And basically, the only objective of the game is to slash your opponent and take away all 3 of his hearts. Now, we also included some extra features, such as meteors falling randomly, as well as power-ups, which is a feather that will appear at around 10 seconds or so. But it's a very simple game where it's exciting because the objective is very clear, and it's also very fun to play with your friends.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the process of making the game. So initially we started off with the art, and we used a program called Tile Studios. That didn't really end up working out, so we switched to GIMP 2.6 and made 16 by 16 pixels, where we drew out each of the swords and the sprites. And then we ended up having somewhere around 63 sprites, but in the end we didn't end up using most of them because we ended up finding a rotation command inside the actual GameDuino program to turn them around, for example. Albert will talk about more about that later. And then we layered all the sprites together to create a sprite sheet, and then using GameDuino Tools, their website, we implemented the code they gave us so we could upload it into our code. And the same goes for the background. We drew it on GIMP, and we used the GameDuino Tools to implement it into our code.
Okay, so next we had to take care of positioning and movement. So because this platform is very, very basic, we basically made every single pixels on that screen ourselves. And so what we also realized was that each character is basically just a set of pixels with an x and y coordinate. So in order to make it move, all we had to do was move that x coordinate based on the amount of time. So based on the amount of pixels it wanted to move at once. Adding more pixels would make it move faster. But the hardest part about this was tying the input of the buttons and the joystick to the actual movement of the characters, meaning that if you press left, he'll actually go left. Now, in order to do that, we had to consult some TAs. our TAs here, Keith and Jonathan, as well as Jared and Brian. But they taught us how to use the class, how to create a class called controller, and how to use the control.read function, as well as other functions on the game Arduino to read the inputs from the buttons and connect them using variables to the actual sprite's movements. However, we also had other problems, such as rotation. As you can see from this game, whenever he moves left or right, he turns his position, means that he faces the other direction. And in order to do that, at first we thought, well, we can just replace the sprite every time he turns, right? But it didn't work because it actually created an after image. So there was like 3 of them on the screen at once. He like multiplied. So in order to fix that, what we did was we basically used the rotation function to actually flip the pixels themselves so that the guy would flip every time he pressed left or right. Last but not least, we also had to create walls, and this was very simple. All we had to do was every time the X position went past the edge of the screen, we reset the X position to the edge of the screen to make sure that he never went off the wall.
For animations, we used an array, which is a set amount of values and grouped together, basically. So for each value, we had one sprite, for instance, the upward-facing sword, diagonal, and then straight. And we simply just called the array and had it run all together, and it ran the whole animation. But one problem we had was it kept looping and doing it again. So what we had to do is set a variable that checked if the animation was done and then prevented it from going again. And also for since each value changed the sprite, it would stay in the same location, so we had to change the X and Y coordinate as different sprites appeared through the array. Like for example, there was the top sword, which would be right above the wizard. We would change it so it would go in front for diagonal and then hit the ground when it was sideways and then go back up for charging. And as far as time goes, or how fast the animations are, we used, I don't want to go too into detail, but we simply just used a function called millis just to slow down or speed up the animation.
Okay, so next we have collision, which is basically the whole point of our game, meaning that when the sword collides with the person, you take away a life, right? So Game Arduino actually has a function for that.
Hold the mic closer.
It's called JK collision. However, it was a little bit complicated, and we didn't have much experience in coding as well as Game Arduino. So we used a more intuitive approach, meaning that we checked to see if the X and Y coordinate of the sword lined up with the actual person. And if it did, then we would take away a life. However, the biggest problem with this was that the X and Y coordinate is only 1 pixel. So in order to actually take away a life, you have to line up the pixel of your sword exactly with that 1 pixel of the person, which is obviously very, very hard, and it would be almost impossible to take a life. So to fix this, we made kind of a box or a range as to where the person could hit. And by doing this, it made it very easy to create a hitbox that the person could use to slash. Last but not least, we had to make the sprites disappear, which was also very easy. And in order to do this, we basically just moved the sprite off the screen every time he lost all 3 lives. Okay, lastly, we had stretch goals, which is basically what we were going to do if we still had time. And as I mentioned before, there's a feather that will appear after around 10 or so seconds, and if you get it, it's a permanent speed boost. It'll help you defeat your enemy, as well as meteors that will come down at random times too, and if you touch them, you will lose all 3 of your lives.
All right, thank you.
Yes. So my name's Teddy Dyer, and
I am Jacob Davis.
and what we chose to do for our project was to create an autonomous car, and we named it Sonic. So put into simple terms, at the start of this class, our objective was to create some form of computing that would take an input, do some form of processing, and then create an output. Now here at DigiPen, there's a class called ECE 110, and that right there is a car that they used in that class. They're given the assignment of programming that to navigate through a maze using the assembly programming language, which is much more difficult than what we had to do, given that we only had a 2-week time frame to work in. So just take note of the top section here of this car, and then you'll see pictures of ours later, and you'll see the differences.
You're probably like, oh, you guys were here for 4 weeks. Why do you only have 2 weeks? Well, before that, we had to learn a number of things about how to work with hardware, such as soldering, which is melting basically lead to attach wires to circuit boards, or basically attach hardware together at a really low level. But anyway, so 2 weeks. By the first week, we wanted to have the hardware set up. We wanted to remove the original PIC microprocessor interface from the car, and then have our Arduino mounted, which is a microprocessor, we'll talk about it. And then figure out values to send from the Arduino called pulse width modulations, which it's just varying high and low voltage to basically send a signal. And then by the second week, we wanted to focus on the actual code and software side and possibly add remote control.
So if you look at this picture right here, this is the Arduino board, and this right here is the microprocessor. That's sort of the main difference between what we did and what the students in ECE 110 did. So with Arduino, we got to use sort of a variation of C and C++, which is much easier to work with than assembly. So we also use infrared sensors as the main input that that we would use through code to create an output. And here, using that input and code, we were able to make it autonomously navigate both through mazes and avoid collisions with walls in sort of a closed ring.
All right. So how it works. We used an analog input from IR sensors, which just means it's not on or off. It actually senses a variety of values so that you can actually sense a variety of distances. So once we could do that, we were able to establish thresholds for various angles around the car so that it could avoid and react to obstacles in its environment rather well, and we'll show you. So just an example is if the right IR sensor is sensing a larger value by a certain threshold than the left sensor, then it would turn right to avoid the object on the right. And then also, like I said earlier, we use pulse width modulation, which is a function of the Arduino to control the motor to actually drive the car, and then a servo motor, which is a smaller motor that can control steering.
All right, so here's going to be some demonstrations of our car actually functioning. This first one's just through a regular maze.
So it avoids objects, as you just saw, because of all the IR sensors. And I'll talk about how it's implemented in the code and basically how we wrote that and got it to do that.
Also in that first demonstration, you saw the three most basic functions that our car does. If you just play it back one more time. The first one, it's sensing an object on its left, so it's turning right. And then here it's about to sense the wall on its right and then turn left and readjust. And then at the very end, you'll see that it senses an object right in front. And what we told it to do in that scenario is back up and turn to a certain direction to change the angle and then avoid going into it again when it returns to forward. And now, this second demonstration is just an example of it avoiding walls in a closed circle. And for the most part, it never ran into walls, but there were some mishaps.
So basically, it would just drive in there in reverse when it saw a wall. This was when we had sort of less advanced software, so it could basically just back up usually, and so it would just drive around in reverse when it needed to.
Yeah, that second demonstration was around the first week of actually doing the project. It was still in its rudimentary stages.
Okay, so now I'll talk about the code. This is the Arduino IDE, which is an environment in which you can write code and upload the code to the microprocessor. And so there are a lot of elements, but I'll just talk about sort of the simplest of the elements, which is it's towards the bottom. So it's saying basically if we took a difference between the left and right sensors, and then if this difference was greater than either a positive 175 or a negative 175, then it would turn either right for positive, because if you take right minus left, then the difference will be positive if right is bigger. and vice versa for left. So, and then we have other things for sensing in front, and if there's something both in front and behind, it'll stop. So.
Okay, so our main objective, like we said at the start of this project, was to just develop a software that would allow the car to autonomously navigate through mazes and avoid collisions, with a stretch goal of also being able to remotely control the car. Then looking back on the process, we did create a fairly in-depth software that allowed it to navigate through mazes and avoid collisions with a pretty decent success rate. It wasn't perfect, and it still ran into some collisions during testing, but for the most part, it was a good success. And then lastly, these are all acknowledgements. First and foremost, Keith Thompson, who's sort of the head of the CE here, and he helped us out, you know, with any questions or materials you needed. And then everything else pretty self-explanatory.
Yes, I am doing a post-mortem because, well, for one, my whole goal was to try to get this thing to fly, and it has proven not to do so. So I'm basically going to go over, one, why it's not working to my knowledge, and then two, what could possibly be done to help make it work. For one, and I'm just going to spit this out now, a DigiPen student found this in a trash can, so I didn't have much to start with. For one, there was a few problems that we encountered. The tail motor didn't work most of the time. The circuitry is quite old and likes to pop off the circuit, requiring resoldering. And the motor ended up being shot. So problems that incurred were just not enough energy was getting sent from the motor to the propellers to actually generate enough lift to get the helicopter off the ground in the first place. And finding out the correct voltage to originally run the battery at was a mystery until I was able to find the student who had found this and discovered that the battery had caught fire the one time he tried to fly. Much reassurance. So from there, I tried a few different motors, replacing the shot-out motor to try to hopefully get enough torque to go through, but either the motor didn't fit, or it was just I couldn't get a gear to fit, to actually turn the gearbox down here. I finally, this week, went to the point of, I am going to get this thing to fly. It's not going to look like how it was before, but it's going to fly. I have yet to do that. Some more radical reconstructing using a more elegant use of a drill to hollow out the casing here on the bottom so that it can actually fit a larger, more power efficient motor to attach this. But that in itself provided more problems in which the hole ended up being too close to the gear and it was at a jarred angle. So more radical construction had to be done to move the motor more forward to get it actually in line with the gear so it would turn correctly. And then another solution that we thought would help ended up turning into a little bit of a problem. We were thinking we'd lubricate the main shaft and the propeller blades so that it wasn't getting caught on anything. While lubricating the main shaft was good and all, when we lubricated the propeller blades, we soon discovered that just made the problem worse because due to it being a consumer model, the blades can turn independent of the gear itself as a safety reason. So if a little kid or kid hits the blades will stop even if the motor's still spinning. So you don't get a cut instead of just stinging. And that turns out to be very bad for lubricating it because as we make it more slick, the energy transference from any friction that was there was then slowly disappearing. So it was even less efficient transferring energy, thus requiring an even bigger motor, which is what I have on here now. I'll try to picture it. This is about the size of the motor that was on there before. This is what's on there now. It's a very much so big step up, but what we figured, it has enough with what we could figure out, it would provide enough power that it would still be able to lift up even though with its increased weight. So its lift to thrust to weight ratio would actually allow it to fly. So it is yet to fly, and a few more things have to be done to make it fly. One, just soldering the motor to the little chip set that was on here. Thankfully, the transmitter on this and the little handheld device, which I have torn apart just to get to the wiring inside, still worked as function, so I thankfully didn't have to mess with infrared or radio transmissions to communicate to the helicopter wirelessly. So, thankfully for that, I didn't have to delve into that as well. So, the other fixes is reattaching some wires so the tail motor will spin again, hooking it up via tether to the ground so I can actually power it, because it's currently what I'm using to power this is the same as the car, the big 7.2 battery packs, and that doesn't really fit in this little battery housing. So yeah. From this I learned quite a lot that, one, motors can burn out very easily. They also don't like being ran for long periods of time. And learning how to soldering very small parts, and then just figuring out what each of these little chips did. This one here, although you probably can't see it, it's a little AM/FM it's an analog digital transformer in a sense of way that it can take both analog and digital inputs. A bit obsessive for consumer grade, but it's interesting to find. And then just a microcontroller processor in here to help drive all the logic. Other than that, it's pretty much, it would take about a week more, I would say, to get it into a flying state, which I don't have an extra week here. Oh, boo-hoo. It's actually fun here, so. Yeah, and there isn't really much else that I could find that was wrong. The propellers are a little bent, but I straightened them out as best I could. And the battery that originally went with this is probably going to be put back in, if nothing else than just the counterbalance it was going to be. But the motor's probably taken up that weight anyway. So yeah. I would love to power it up and show you one of the two interesting things that happens when I do power it up now, but due to safety reasons, I'm not going to. Yes, safety is first. And yes, post-mortem, I keep saying David, post-mortem, basically I'm saying why it didn't work instead of giving you a finished product, but sometimes you just can't. You prototype for a reason. You try to keep working and figuring things out until you get it to work. And I'll just throw it out. Any questions? Yes?
What would happen if you did turn it on?
One of two things. Either this gear will pop out down and disconnect from the motor itself, or two, it will spin for a little while and then the propeller will take off without the helicopter. And probably land in the crowd. Again, safety reasons. Any other questions, or are we good? Good? All right.
And pre-college this year was a really awesome class. I've TA'd for it for the last 3 years, and it's been a lot of fun, but this class was one of like the most positive and enthusiastic, and it was really a pleasure to teach for. I guess that's really all the notes I have, so without further ado, here's our first team.
Hello, so we're Chris Blush. Our game is H2O Go. Hit the button. There we go. Teamwork at its best, guys. So I'm Brandon Valdez. I'm one of the game designers. I did a lot of level design. I helped with the art, and
I'm Charles Demars. I'm the other game designer, and I helped with the programming.
I'm Ben Schwedler. I was the lead programmer for this game, and Charles helped me out a lot with the programming.
I'm Sabrina Fletchery. I was the lead artist, but I did have a lot of help with art assets from Brandon.
so the inspiration for the game, start off, I was in a sandwich shop when I first came to Washington, and they were going on about how this has been the hottest, like it had been the hottest June that like Seattle had like ever had. So in my head I had this idea of like this person who was like melting, and they were like running out of time, and then Charles had the idea of like some sort of blob that was changing into different states. So one thing led to another, and then we got the idea of H2O Go. Had we had more time, we would have gone more into the plot in the game, and you would see the different characters that we had planned. But the idea of the game is that our main character, River, is being chased in a sewer by Dr. Ipdrop. You can see the clever pun right there, Trip Drop. And they have to escape out of the sewers.
So, we're going to talk about some of the game objects in the game and some of the problems we had coding them. So one of the objects in the game is the pipe, and what it's supposed to do is, as a water, you can go in it and press space, and you'll appear in the exit pipe. And we had some problems with positioning the pipes in a way that wouldn't break the level, and in a way that made sense to the player. Another object was the fan. What this does is it creates a gust of wind that blows the gas player back, so the gas can't enter certain areas. We had a lot of troubles with the particle effects and making them go in the direction that the wind was actually blowing. And finally, we had the cannon over there, the one that says Dr. Ipdrop on it. There's two types. There's one that shoots at fireballs and one that shoots at ice balls. And each one changes, if the player hits one of those projectiles, their state is forcefully changed. And we had a lot of trouble positioning them so that the game wouldn't break if you changed into different states multiple times. And there's an interesting glitch where you could spawn multiple players at once and all their collision would stop working all at once. That was a fun error to fix.
Okay, so for the art assets, creating the ice cube form and the gas form was relatively easy. I had some trouble deciding what to make her water form look like, but in the end I decided to make her look sort of like a slug, just because it seemed like the way to go and it was way fun to animate. To tie all of the characters together, to make it feel like it was like the same character, I gave all the sprites the same face, and that there is the concept art for the background, which was a pain to draw because lots of parallel lines. Woo. There's the colored version, which was way more fun to do. This is just the water cycle, which when it's animated, she just kind of like slides forward and goes back like a slug. This is the gas cycle. The air just kind of like turns around the face stays put.
And now, without further ado, we're going to play a demo level from our game, H2O Go. So this is River. She is in her water state, and River's basic movements are just walking around and jumping from platform to platform. Whenever the liquid state comes across a pipe, which is down here, she can use it to teleport or like drain through to another part of the level. This is a grate. The gas and the liquid can go through grates at any time, being that they would just sort of go through that object. If we go down here, River is now an ice cube. In her new solid state, she can go over grates and not go directly through them, and break rusty pipes in order to move on to different parts of the level. If we want to go back to our original state, we go through the fire, and River, in her water state, can go into fans and not be blown away. and now turn into her gas state.
As gas, River's unique ability is that she can fly, and this will help getting to heights that water and solid could not get to before. However, to restrict the gas so that it couldn't go anywhere in the level, we added the fans, and River is blown away by the fans if she's in her gas state. As you can see, she can fly up and down, and what would be harder for the ice and liquid state is easy for the gas. However, the gas cannot interact with switches because it's gas, but once it turns back into water or solid using an ice cannon here, it can, and it will open the door. The yellow things you just saw are bonus coins, and they are used as a scoring system for our game. And there are sparkles and a little ding noise, but the sound isn't working. And what you just saw there was a secret room. It is colored a little bit differently so the player can have a hint at what's going on. And then if they just walk into it, the secret room will clear up and they'll see that there's a new passageway. That is the finish. She can only finish as water because it's like a pipe. And it also makes sense because you start the next level as water. That's our game.
So we are Team Decisive, and this is our game, Kyle. I'm Ralph Drake. I am the lead game designer. Why did I say that? I'm the Core Mechanics programmer. Excuse me very much.
I'm Luke Koji. I'm the actual game designer.
Guys, let's do 1 to 2 inches with the microphone.
All right. Julia LeBlanc was our wonderful artist. Unfortunately, she can't join us today.
I'm Michael Paul Moore, and I'm the gameplay programmer.
And I'm Dylan Ty, and I'm the artificial intelligence programmer.
All right, so our current progress on the game this week is, first, we unfortunately had to cut most of our animations due to our time constraints.
Some of our sprites were changed due to make them more visible to the players.
Some enemy balancing had to occur, and so we got the pig to have a sword, and we got the mushroom to shoot, and we added more from our base enemy, just the cat.
And finally, we polished all the features that we currently have in the game so they work the way we want them to work, and they're not unfair to the player.
So this is our first room, and in this room there'll be a small tutorial, but we won't show you today. And the player can choose between controlling with keyboard and mouse or game controller, and has 2 attacks, a sword slash and a projectile via slingshot.
All right, so up in our first room, we have enemies enemy spawning, and so our first enemy here is the cat. And the cat, as Mike Paul killed really quickly, but they have low amount of health, as you probably have seen, and compared to the other 2 enemies, and they are really fast, also compared to the other 2 enemies. And then in our next room, we have the pig. Now the pig is a lot slower than the cat, but it has a lot more health comparatively. But that square that you see on screen is actually supposed to be the pig's sword, but due to time restraints and animation cuts, we only have a red square to represent the pig swinging, and then the black square representing the pig swung. Therefore, like when you get close to the pig, you don't take damage if it's red, but you take damage when it's black. So you have to get out of the way before it changes color. And then finally, we have mushrooms. Now the mushrooms, third final enemy, they don't move around, and they shoot projectiles at you. And if you touch the enemy or you touch the projectile, then you're going to get hurt. But the mushroom has more health than the cat, but has less health than the pig.
You can see along the bottom here the HUD. We have HP and ammo. You may be wondering why the HP isn't going down as Michael Paul is getting hit. That's because we have God mode on, so nothing we don't want to happen happens. As you'll see when Michael Paul enters the next room, a random enemy spawns. Now, this spawning is controlled by our dynamic difficulty system, so it won't always be, you won't know which enemies you're going to face ahead of time. appears we're having some technical difficulties. There we go. So this is what it'll look like in the later stages when the dynamic difficulty is much higher. There will be a lot of enemies, but the player will be much more powerful and have much more ammo, so he'll be able to dismiss these enemies quicker. Thus it becomes more of a reaction game.
The enemies, as the level progresses, as Ralph has said, they usually tend to, except for this room, this is just luck, but the later rooms, there will be more monsters spawning, and there will be different types of enemies spawning. And these, their attacks will, for the mushroom, the attacks will come more frequently, and for the mushrooms, the attacks will be faster, and the cats will actually speed up as you dynamic difficulty and level difficulty goes up.
Now, we've mentioned dynamic difficulty and level difficulty. Those are two variables we implemented after testing. Since a lot of our game is randomly generated, we decided to have the dynamic difficulty system, which increases as the player picks up things. You may be seeing these small sprites appearing on the ground, like shoes or golden swords or golden slingshots. These give the player more powerful attacks or faster speed or more health. Thus, the dynamic difficulty increases when the player picks these items up. So a player that is very weak will have very weak enemies to kill, while a player that is very strong will have very strong enemies to kill. Thus, the game is challenging, no matter what sort of random numbers have given you in their favor. And that is about it for our game, Kyle. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. We are Good Game Studios, and our game is Raven Race.
Hi, I'm Eli Vasquez. I'm the game designer.
My name is Alyssa, and I'm the game artist.
Hi, I'm Cosio Ferrix. I was the environment programmer.
Hi, my name is Lucas Standard. I am the AI programmer, or the programmer.
And I'm Silas Chu, the gameplay programmer. So Raven Race is a top-down 2D wave-based action game where you play as a scarecrow and you're defending your corn maze from crows that are coming in to eat your corn. And you defeat them by using a various amount of traps and luring the crows with corn. So let's take a look at the actual game.
Protect your corn. So here you can see our main character has just started off. The first wave has just begun. And a ravenous crow is in his field attempting to eat his corn. So he gets rid of it using one of the many traps around his field. On the HUD, you can see a lot of things are being kept track of. So at the top left, there's a drop-down menu. You can see a little piece of corn and now a birdhouse as he's picked it up. And also the amount of crows left in the wave, his current score, how many corn stalks he has left. The wave's just been completed. He has a couple seconds before the next one starts. And there it goes. The game is wave-based, which means it gets harder over time with every wave. More crows spawn, and it's just harder to deal with. You have a lot more to keep track of. Also, as time progresses, you will get healed. If he takes damage and then the wave ends, you will get some of his health back. You can see his health bar up there at the top. And you will also get more points as time goes on so that you can keep track of how well you did, I guess. Furthermore...
Do you want to explain each different kind of trap?
Yeah, sure. So that one, the little bundle of hay, it's like a hay bale. You roll it, it crushes the crows beneath it. We have sound effects for that, but sound issues, apparently?
These speakers aren't working.
Okay. Well, anyways, they're pretty great. So at the bottom right, you can see also a bear trap. You can pick that one up and move it around. Like that. And you can place it, pick it back up, place it again. You can do whatever you want with it. You can lure them into it. And once they get into it, pop. And the last one we have up there is a sort of like a saw blade. And you put a birdhouse over it so they're not scared of it, and they fly into it. It's pretty good. We have a sound effect for it. It sounds like a wood chipper.
Also, when you get close to the birds, they sort of charge at you.
When you get close to the birds and they're not eating, they will charge you, like that. And that happens to you 3 times, you die. So, die, Eli.
Okay.
There's the game over screen. You can see how many crows you killed, the score that you got, which is how many crows you killed times 3, plus the number of waves you survived, plus some other arbitrary numbers. And when we're at the right, it tells you how long you lasted. And you can press space to go back to the main menu. That's our game.
Okay, so here's how we came up with the concept for our game. So we started with the basic idea of a scarecrow who's going to be sort of defending his field from a bunch of crows who are trying to eat his corn. But the original idea was like a field, and that didn't really make much sense because like a field's not an interesting environment; it's just sort of an open field. So what we decided was a corn maze would be a lot more interesting because there's a lot of different environments and corners to go around. And when we had the idea for the corn maze, we thought it'd be sort of interesting to have like traps and stuff and have it be more of a stealth kind of game. Because that sort of like the maze sort of lends itself to that kind of gameplay. For our gameplay inspirations, the maze is sort of like a Pac-Man style maze, and we also like the idea of the crows sort of chasing around was sort of inspired by Pac-Man. And then sort of the stealth elements were sort of Metal Gear-esque.
So the Crow AI, when we started out, we were really ambitious. We thought about all these cool ideas, but it took such a long time to get right that really what happened with the Crow AI is that now it only turns when it's about to hit a wall, and this way it becomes much more predictable as a player. So you can maneuver around the crow and place traps where you know the crow is going to go.
So the ideas for the art that we had were inspired by a game called Don't Starve Together. We basically wanted to go for like a creepy kind of theme, and the style was more based off of Castle Crashers, which had thick lines and flat shading, and basically the same colors. So all the art that you see, I drew all the art and animated everything, and we tried to keep a very small color palette, using only 2 to 3 colors for each script.
That's the end.
And that's our game. Thank you very much for this.
Well then, we are the investigators. I'm Gabrielle Smith. I'm one of the game designers.
I'm Kyle Wood. I'm the other game designer.
I'm Freddie Rash, and I'm the game programmer.
And I'm Kate Baird. I'm the game artist.
So, and this is our game in the witch's house. So first we thought we'd kind of talk about where we got our inspiration from.
So as you can see, these games, what we have here on this slide, on the top right we have Valiant Hearts, on the bottom right we have Child of Light, and then on the bottom left we have Stick It to the Man. Huh? Oh, shoot. Okay, so as you can see, these games that we got inspiration from are 2D puzzle platformers with very illustrative environments, and so we really like those aspects about those games, so we tried to incorporate that into our own. And so that's how we led to our game called In the Witch's House.
So kind of just a summary. The player is an imp. You play as an imp. Imps like shiny things. Conveniently, in our game, there's a witch's house nearby, and she has shiny things in the house. Ooh. So one day, while she goes out, you decide to sneak in and see if you can get some of those.
So the main goal of the game is to collect the shiny objects that are scattered throughout the level. And there are also different objects you can pick up to solve simple puzzles. And your overall goal in the game is to get out of the witch's house before the witch gets home, or well, the time runs out. Let's play. And so starting off the level, you'll notice there's a book which gives you the basic controls, and you can sort of move about. You meet your first obstacle there, being the spider. And then coming back up the level, you get introduced to your first collectible object up above and your first pickup below.
So you might have noticed that some of the sounds appear to be working, so that is questionable. But so as some of the problems we had throughout the experience was with the pickupables, like this magic beam right here, and getting it to work with the puzzle pieces, as well as making it so that certain platforms can work certain ways, as well as the ladders, which, because we were using pre-made scripts, could require a bit more work than normally would be required.
And originally that lattice back there, we had a puzzle where you climb on it, but we had some issues with foreground and background because you see there are outlines along the objects you can't jump on, and so it was really hard for our players to figure out that they could climb on it. So in the end, we decided to go for the much more simple 2-platform puzzle.
So as you can tell, we have a very art-heavy game. So one of the challenges in creating our game was to kind of figure out what can we use as visual cues and how to differentiate foreground and background.
So one of the things you may have noticed is the book, which introduces the puzzle pieces for this level, and which also connects to the bar on the bottom of the screen, which shows you what you need to collect and what you haven't collected and put where they're supposed to belong, like this chocolate piece at the moment. And some of you might also notice the timer in the top left corner, which is affected by both levels of the game. So no matter, it goes from level 1 and level 2, and as it goes down, it will change colors.
At around the 1 minute mark, which should be coming up here soon, the timer will turn red and a new song will begin, which sort of has a more forceful tempo and sort of gives you a rush sense of getting out of the house. That's the dragon over there that you need to tame, and we decided to reuse this bean puzzle from the first level because the first level sort of introduced that to the player, and we decided to use again, so there is some familiarity with what you have to do.
So, upon completing the requirements for this level, you will receive a cookie which you're supposed to give to the dragon, which upon doing so will allow you to continue which will allow you to finish the game, which will allow you to escape. And we'll bring you to our You Win screen, which I just decided, why can't you have fun after you win? So, confetti, which is the part of our game. So,
and then if you lose, you get this screen,
which will give you a witch's crackle, but some of the sounds don't appear to be working for the most part at the moment.
Maybe within the game.
The other kind of fun thing about this, I don't know if you noticed when I went up to grab the chocolate, there is a little bottle labeled imp, just to kind of give the players, oh shoot, she might come back and she might want me in my bottle.
I'm a programmer, Kate's a game artist, and Kyle and Gabriel are both the game designers. We all do sort of our own thing, so if we don't talk with each other, our ideas get mixed up and certain things will not be able to get through.
Other big thing we noticed, time management is hugely important. We were okay for the most part because we were pretty careful about how we were spending our time on what. Like, we were like, ooh, a third level would be cool, but let's try and get actual levels done first so we don't have this big problem of we have partially finished levels but not actual levels.
And another problem I would have was with the engines causing different bugs to happen. So I had to get used to the engine that I've never used before, and it will allow. And because of that, I was able to make this game, but we weren't able to add as much stuff.
And the final thing is Happy Idea Land. Our teacher said that Happy Idea Land is sort of place with all these amazing ideas. It's great, but you want to get out of there as quick as you can because otherwise you get stuck in it. And we did have a bit of an issue with that at the beginning. During like the second week presentation, we didn't have that much foundation in the game, but we were able to work around that and actually create a project that we're all happy with. Thanks for listening.
We're here to present to you our game called Claymore. So my name is Justin Fleming. I'm the game designer, and in lack of an actual artist on the art track, I did the art for our game as well.
I'm Mason Muehlbauer, and I am the other game designer, and I focus more on level design.
I'm Dylan Barlow. I'm pretty much the only programmer now, as we had one for the first couple of weeks, but he stopped coming, and all the rest of his workload was shifted onto me. Yay.
So what is Claymore? Well, we could stand here and show you some slides and talk about it, but we'd rather show you. So Dylan's going to play it for us. So Claymore is a top-down action-adventure game. You play as Claymore, a knight with a very, very big sword. You move around with the arrow keys and you hit space to attack. Dylan, follow the bunny. So we use the bunny to show players that walking into the darkness is not a bad thing. It takes you to the next area. So the aim of the game is to progress through the forest and find the leader of the orcs and defeat him. I did all the art assets for the game, the animations and the tile sets. So I made individual images that are each path or tree or flowers and such. And I was then able to pass it on to Mason, who then laid them out and made levels. I'm going to now pass on to Mason. He can talk about the levels.
Okay, so our levels are, in a sense, randomly generated. So what happens is we basically have a 2D array, which is lots of numbers compiled together. So we have a set map. So there's tons of different rooms, and each one is individually made and randomly generated, but the same type of room is always in the same place. So in other words, the contents of the room are different and the layout of the room are different, but a 4-room door will always be right here. This will never be like a 1-door room that you can't go anywhere else and then the game's over. So then also through game testing we realized that we needed a solid path, because originally we had a path that broke up every once in a while to kind of make the player explore, but through testing we figured out that it kind of more disoriented people than encouraged them to explore through our game. So one of the most requested things that we ended up putting into our game was screen shake and knockback. It just feels right with the big sword you're carrying and using. Without it, it would kind of feel weird and empty and like you're swinging a toothpick instead of a huge, like 50-pound claymore. Also, as you've been seeing, when when Dylan kills the orcs, they drop ramen, and that will help replenish Claymore's health, which is shown down here in the bottom. And then to talk more about the level changing, there are basically invisible things that can tell when you hit them, and when you hit them, they will take you to a level that is made by me, that will have specific spawn and enemies in them, and then it will lead to other rooms, and then eventually you can lead into like a dead end room, but it has a path back so you don't get lost. So you can always find your way in this game. And as Dylan keeps going up, whoa, that's not good.
Okay, well, there's a bug, but we can show you Berserk mode. So around week 2, we got very overexcited in Happy Idea Land and started imagining Claymore sort of going into Super Saiyan and flying around the screen extremely fast and extremely powerful. Dylan got so excited that he wrote a pseudo script that night, and it was in the game the next day. So I never, sadly, got around to finishing all the art for Claymore. That's why he can only slash left and right. But as well as that, I also was never able to animate the Berserk mode. So what Claymore could have been? Well, we were very ambitious, if we're honest. Making a game which is sort of random, but everything is still sensible and makes sense, was a lot to do. And there was a lot of art and a lot of animating, and losing Nate on our last week kind of hit us hard when we were thinking we would finish things in the last couple of days and we could play test and get everything done. But I think we're all very happy with what we've done. And we also want to say a special thanks to all the TAs that worked on it with us. I think it sort of became nightmare fuel by the end of week 3 and week 4. But we're very appreciative of them and all their hard work. So thank you for listening.
We're Team Shmeem, and our game is Daimo in the Rough. I'm Jonah Hatch. I'm one of the game designers.
I'm Ken Robinson, and I'm the other game designer.
I'm Tate Brazel. I'm the game programmer.
I'm Julianne Sprague, and I'm the game artist.
Okay, so about our game, Daimo in the Rough. Well, you play as Daimo, who is a baby dragon separated from his family. It is a 2D adventure platformer, so you jump around on platforms, complete the level. Daimo's special trait is that he wears a bow tie, which makes him unique. And so as he goes through the levels, he gets stronger, and this is to simulate him actually growing up and becoming a fully grown, powerful dragon. And our unique levels, we have the underground level where he starts and he climbs up out into like an ancient ruins level, and from there he can jump around on the clouds in the sky. So he really broadens his horizons as he grows up and becomes a powerful dragon.
Alright, so Daimo, like you said, is a 2D side-scrolling platformer where you are trying to just get through the levels and just trying to, get through the game because he's trying to just live on his own at this point. So at the beginning of the level, you can notice that you see these arrows, and you're like, you think as a player, wow, that looks awfully similar to the arrow keys. Oh my god, arrow keys! And so they try them and they move, and then
you know, they try some other, they try up and then they jump. You're jumping on the platforms, you're just jumping across, not hard. Now you notice there is when he touched the side, he grabbed the side of a platform. And you learn you can wall jump. Wall jumping is very key as it lets you ascend so you can get up through the levels and climb onto higher up platforms, thus to progress. Now you notice that was too far to jump singly, so he double jumped. Double jumping is key. He uses his wings to get more air so he can go farther. And then here, you see another button, the X button. Is like, oh, so you see that and you try it out. Oh, look, he's roaring. He's roaring, and that is one of his attacks. The roar normally will knock back enemies, and you see because the Shad Pine, it kind of jumped, but the Shad Pine is unmovable. So the attack is very important because you have to kill a bunch of enemies to get through, obviously. And then when you see that, you know that that's the end of the level. Now when you go through it, it leads to the next level, the Ancient Ruins. And you see it from the enemy, the Shad Pine. You also see the snakes. The snakes are important because they will block your path, and they're just more of an obstacle. Now you also notice that you see the Z button down there. It was a way to just let the player know that, oh hey, you can shoot fire. Naturally, you're a dragon, you should be able to shoot fire, right? So you go through the level, and you're shooting your fire, and you feel really good and powerful. And then there's another enemy, the spider. The spider's goal is to jump on top of you because it's hard to hit it there, and it wants to grab you from on top. So it's going to be tough to kill it, but it can be knocked back using your roar, which is very important. You know, you're just progressing through the levels, and you kill your enemies, you jump on platforms. It's really all there is to it. Now I'm going to pass it off to Julian and talk about the art.
The art that I completed are all shown in the game, and Daimo's jumping and running took a long time for me to at least complete because this is my first time animating ProjectFUN, and I've been told that it's very hard to move and have it in a position to at least jump or run. And it's been a really fun experience to at least animate ProjectFUN.
All right, now I'll start talking about the game programming. So right from the get-go, you can start seeing our code at work, just interacting with levels, with collision. That took most of the first week to get ready since I opted to, when making this game, create my own character movement, my own sort of controller, instead of using the pre-made code that some of the other teams have used. I mainly chose that due to, on the first day, we were shown a whole bunch of demos that use the same program that we would be using. And I really didn't like how those games played because a lot of the collision was off, or you weren't getting very much freedom of movement. So I decided to start from scratch and write my own. And so that way, I was also able to program a lot of the different abilities that he has, so I can not just tell that the player is colliding, but I can also tell where he's colliding, which is really important. All right, we'll finish the demo and we'll get back to some more slides.
Alright, so here are the animations that I've completed, and since it was and some of the tiles that I did, but we all pitched in together to make most of the tiles, like this one and also that one up there.
Those are the ones for the underground level. That was the very beginning. You can see the kind of the general tiles and then some of the other weird odds and ends ones that they've got it placed around.
And we like to make a special thanks to Kate for helping us with backgrounds. Thank you, Kate. And here are the enemies that you saw in the demo. Here's the Shad Pines, which, as Jonah said, are only walk back and forth. There are the Shad Bats, which only fly from right, left, up, down. It's mostly in a circle. And here are the scary spiders that are supposed to be very terrifying and make you want to run away. And there's the snake.
All right, I'll speak a little bit about one of the problems I faced, which was writing anime AI for each one of these different kinds of enemies. So for shadbats, you can see that you can see in the caverns that they followed like a certain path, but if you knocked them out of the way, they would continue along the path that they were starting at. For snakes, like Jonah said, there are more obstacles than actual enemies that'll follow you, so they're mainly there to get you in your way, and you'll either like want to shoot them with your fireball or roar, but it doesn't really matter which one. Shadpines, those are also obstacles because they're fearless and they won't turn away if you hit them with your roar. So they mainly stand on platforms and make it difficult for you to move from place to place. And then finally spiders were the first enemies we made and probably the hardest to combat because of their very complex way of fighting you, which is basically just trying to get on top of you. If you're close to them, they'll start running around and jumping over obstacles to get near you. But left alone, they just wander the level aimlessly until you come close. All right. So there were three main hurdles that I had to deal with during making this level, which was making the removable abilities, having a level interaction, and making the enemy AI, which I just explained. The removable abilities was a huge part of our game because even though sometimes we had to cut back on what we wanted to make, we still wanted the core concept of player progression and adding abilities as we go along to each level. So I made a separate code for the designers to use so that in each level they would just be able to make a new sort of player which had different abilities. Level interaction that dealt with mainly tiles that hurt you, enemy placement, and checkpoints and level ends, which carried you from one level to the next or from position to position.
So we had many ideas, and we unfortunately also stayed in Happy Idea Land for far too long, and we had a lot of ideas that we wanted to put in. For example, we were going to originally have 7 levels, one of which was an introduction level for teaching you how to move, and a final level for a boss. That's the boss. That was originally some concept for the boss. It was going to be a giant dark dragon that you'd fight. It would be a static boss that would just kind of sit in its position, and you'd fight it by jumping around, avoiding its attacks, and then taking the prime time to attack. We also would have plenty more enemies, 3 unique enemies per level, and we would also have more player animations as well, so that there was more dynamics for the player to see when playing. Thanks for watching.
We are Team Squid Salad, and our game is called Graveyard Smash.
My name is Aaron Bailey. I did the game art.
All right, working in the back there trying to get us ready to show.
I'm Scott Syra. I did the game design and testing.
I'm Isaac Duga. I was in charge of the gameplay programming.
I'm Max Whitehead. I did the pathing and menu programming.
All right. We're going to move right along, start up the game.
So this is our menu screen. We have the controls for both characters and the option to choose between 1 or 2 players. So we'll be showing you 2 players. So this is Graveyard Smash. The dead is rising, crawling out of the graves, and they're trying to leave the graveyard to terrorize the local town. And it's up to these 2 grave diggers to stop that from happening. They do this by grabbing the zombies and throwing them back into the graves. Only 10 zombies can leave before the game is over. And as the game progresses, time goes by, more and more zombies will start to spawn. In the center of the screen, we have a torch. And this torch has an area effect of light. And as the zombies move through this radius of light, they move slower. And each grave digger also has their own radius of light emitting from their shovels that also slow zombies. One of the things we noticed while having players test this game is that the grave diggers tended to just pick up the zombies and throw them into the closest gravestone, and it got kind of repetitive. So you may have noticed that, let's see if we can see it here, but some of the gravestones will darken. They can temporarily fill up with zombies, So this basically forces the players to move around the map and utilize all of the gravestones. And Aaron will talk about our art.
Yeah, so as far as art goes, the core idea for the game came from classic arcade games like Dig Dug or Pac-Man. And we really wanted the two main players to be the most prominent thing on the screen. So with the ring of light and their bright colors really brings them out, makes them easy to see.
And you also might notice that we have little dirt particle effects popping out when they bury the zombies. And in a moment here, the zombies will overtake the grave diggers, and you'll see our end screen. Grave diggers.
And now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that did not make it into the final version. As soon as Scott is ready, he'll start us off on that.
Okay, so originally we had a very different idea about the game. Instead of being a cooperative game, it was going to be sort of competitive versus multiplayer game, where there weren't two gravediggers, rather there was a gravedigger and a ghost, whose job it was to go around the map touching the graves and spawning the zombies, try to overwhelm the gravedigger. But unfortunately, as time progressed, we sort of realized that the ghost just wasn't very fun to play. We were sort of just moving in the map in a circle. So we ended up cutting him and just replacing him with another gravedigger.
Another system that we tried to go through and see if we felt it had a good place in our game would be a color coding system. So back when we had the ghost, we thought about, okay, we'll give the ghost a color, and if he finds a gravestone of the same color, then that'll spawn a better zombie. Or maybe instead we can color the zombies and then have it be a little bit of a color matching game. But ultimately, we felt that these were just restrictions. It didn't necessarily make the game better. It only really made the other parts of the game look better because some of it was more restrictive and less fun. Perhaps the saddest thing that we had to let go of was the high scores. The story of the high scores was, he was just sitting there in his text file, all the code ready to make it run. We threw every test we could think of at it, and it passed. We actually put it in the game, and it failed every single time. So, just didn't work. I personally think that that was the way of the ghost having his revenge. And he also decided to monkey with our presentation of it too. But that is mostly it. We've come out the other side of the pre-college program. We're all alive, we're all sane, and we have a game. So not much more we can ask for.
We are Team Ambition, and our game is Andromeda Assault.
I'm Jason. I'm the programmer and the artist of, and also the animator of the team.
I'm Eamon Aldridge. I'm also a programmer and an artist.
I'm Sean Rochford, and I am a programmer, and I also did most of the particle systems.
I'm Cameron Reeves. I'm the game designer and artist.
And we had Justin Swears as a guest artist because our team actually doesn't have an artist, so we all contributed. Thank you, Justin.
Alright, so Andromeda Assault is a real-time strategy game, or RTS, focusing main objective is to destroy the other player's base before they destroy yours. You play as either the Nebula, the Void, the other guy's a Nebula, the guy's a Void. They have 4 different ships available to them. Each one has different abilities, and you can utilize them in different ways to make different strategies. The inspiration for this game came from Galaga. The ship designs are kind of similar. And also Age of War, which is a 2D real-time strategy game.
Alright, we're going to hop right into the demo.
Here we go. So yes, these are the ships that I was just telling you about. On the left side, you see the yellow Nebula, and on the right side, you see the blue Void. All right, next. All right, this slide briefs you about the prices and the resources that we implement into the game. You generate 10 resources at a time. Also, we have a supply cap. We had to add the supply cap because of our control scheme. You can only control a maximum of 4 units. All right, next. And then we have an interactive control slide. So it encourages the player to try and press some buttons, and sure enough, when they do, they are rewarded by the buttons lighting up by their respective colors. All right, let's go back to the menu screen. Briefly, the controls button beneath the tutorials just skips you to the right to that last page of the tutorial menu where you saw the interactive controllers. And now we're going to show you what happens when you press play.
Okay, play.
So when you press the play button, you're granted access to 4 different maps, and each map has a different structure than the other maps. Some maps are much more open than others, such as the first map. Go there. Anyways, some maps are much more open space than others. Go back.
We have a mini map here, mini menu, so we can exit as well.
And some maps are much more focused around like a choke point, like map B or map X. Pick either of those. And these different map structures provide like different opportunities and strategies that you can choose from map to map. And going to the buildings, you might have noticed that each side has 2 buildings. And each side consists of an outpost and 2 buff buildings. While the maps are generally symmetrical, the buff buildings are different for each side. The Nebula utilize a damage buff, which of course improves damage, and a speed buff, which improves their movement speed. Meanwhile, the Void has a defense buff and a construction buff, the defense improving the health bar of the ships, and the construction buff lowering the price of the ships that the Void can create.
Okay, as you can see, the ships are also shooting little things. We made that shooting AI in, I think, the first week, actually. It pretty accurately predicts where the ship's going to be, unless the ship takes evasive maneuvers. And so a lot of the game has to do with dodging bullets. The other thing another feature we've implemented is the ship destroyal, the particle effects, and the screen shake. As you can see when that ship destroyed, the screen shock and particle effects. And then also we have a game end screen, if you guys wouldn't mind killing one of the bases. And unfortunately, the other controller isn't working, so we're not actually able to show you any combat. There we go. And it'll take you.
We managed to do quite a lot in the amount of time that we had, and that was actually rather surprising how far we got. However, we did still have to scrap a lot of the content that we initially thought of. For instance, the very first thing that we had to scrap was a third faction, which would be a lot of work adding it to the movement controls and just having a third controller for the first part. And secondly, we also had to scrap the abilities here. The main reason why we scrapped that was because it was too much information for the players to understand, since we already had problems with people having trouble building stuff in the first place. And then the other thing that we scrapped was the central factory. In the very first week that we made this, we had to we wanted this in the very first day. However, it ended up being almost no use whatsoever, so we ended up scrapping it and not actually implementing a capture program. And then the last thing we got rid of was the single player that we want to do, which would have been rather helpful for the presentation. And that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Hello, we are Team Pixels. I'm the game designer, Jacob Carr.
I am Jacob Gagnon, the lead programmer.
I'm Charles Badusky. I'm the game programmer for the AI. Justin is not here today.
So first we're going to start with a demo of Pixel Armageddon. So that was the main screen, and if you're playing on Xbox, it'll show you the Xbox controls, but since we're playing on keyboard, it shows us the keyboard controls. So Pixel Armageddon is a top-down, multi-directional shooter, much like if anyone's played Geometry Wars. That's basically what our inspiration was. And you're an anti-malware program installed onto a computer that has to fight off all of the viruses and find the final boss, which is the Trojan virus, to rid the computer and win the game, basically. This is our shield power-up, so if enemies touch you, then they don't do any damage to you, and you can shoot out of it. And then right there is our tri-shot power-up, where you shoot 3 bullets, much like a shotgun, and it goes, and the power-ups last for 10 seconds each. We also have a health power-up that gives you more health, obviously, and it's unlimited, so you can have as much health as you can gather as long as you don't take any damage. Some power-ups will spawn in the shield, so none of the enemies can break it, but the shield will go away after you acquire the power-up. And that's what happens when you die. We have a death screen, and we also have a win screen for when you do win.
So the boss we programmed has 3 attacks. Basically every time it's random. The boss sounds music AI was found by Jacob, and slow motion mode. Yeah.
So since our art's in here, I'll talk about the art. It's a 60-bit inspiration, and it's centered around Tron theme for the colors and a Doom type pixely era. And he did 375 total sprites for the power-ups, the enemy, for our power-ups, enemies, boss, and player. So for my aspect, I designed how the game would look, like a Tron, and then pixely. We were originally going to have like a room-based game, like Kyle, but we decided to go with a wave-based game that would implement into the boss. I also designed how the game would play, so if it would shoot, how fast like it would shoot, how the enemies would move around, and stuff like that. And I also worked with the programmers and artists to make this game come to life. And that's it. We also want to thank the TAs for helping.